Okay, so we're just going to do a little bread tutorial. I had a couple of requests to do this and we thought it would make a fun family night activity. So here we go. We're not going to use anything fancy. Wooden spoon bowl. It's my very pretty red bowl, so it's not very cute. So let's talk about bread for just a second because I think a lot of us get really anxious about bread and there's no reason to be. At the heart of it, bread is just water, some sort of flour, a little bit of salt, a little bit of a fat of some kind, so oil, butter, shortening, something like that, and a little bit of sugar. And as long as you keep sort of a ratio with those things, how much you have of them doesn't matter. So I'm gonna make today a rough, rustic bread recipe that I like to make because it sort of cleans out some of my leftovers. We call it clean the refrigerator bread because we start with a base of oatmeal or cracked wheat or cream of wheat or whatever the kids have had for breakfast that's left over because they always make way too much. The nice thing about this is it gives some nice moisture to your bread, so it's not going to be overly dry. It gives a lot of texture to the bread, so it's not going to be the perfect like sandwich bread that has no texture to it. It's going to be a more rustic, rough loaf. So we start with our leftovers, and I have a couple of cups of cooked oatmeal. And again, you don't have to add this. This is just something I start with mine. But if you don't have any, you just make the bread regular without it because it has enough, it doesn't add liquid, it doesn't change the percentages or the proportions of anything else. It just adds texture and it adds flavor. So I'm gonna add that right here. It's still warm, so we're gonna let it cool off for just a second while we do some of the other things. So I have here just a cup of water, warm, just lukewarm. It doesn't have to be very warm. Just enough that when you put your hand in the water, it's warm to your skin, but it's not uncomfortable. You don't have to measure it. You don't have to get it to some certain degree, just slightly warm water. And then I'm gonna add just a tablespoon of sugar, and this is just to help the yeast develop. And then I'm gonna get in here and I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of yeast. So this is probably going to be enough for 3 fairly large loaves. We'll write up the recipe so that you have it. And then I have my yeast, I have my sugar, I have my warm water, and I'm just going to really quickly stir it in so that it gets mixed in. And then we're going to set it to the side and let it proof just a little bit, and it's going to get foamy. There we go. Okay, so to my oatmeal that I have in my bowl, I'm gonna add a little bit of water. Just 1 cup. There we go. We're gonna add 1 cup of water to it. And then we're going to add a little bit of salt. This is just gonna be a teaspoon of salt. Add it to our mix. We're going to add another tablespoon of sugar. If you like a sweeter bread, you can add 2 tablespoons here. It doesn't matter. It's not going to ruin your bread. It's a dinner roll type bread is a little sweeter. It would take about 1/2 cup. Sort of a rustic loaf, it's low on the sweetness and it sort of depends on the flavor of the flours that you use. So I'm just going to add a tablespoon. And then I'm going to add a little bit of oil. I'm going to add about 1/4 cup of oil. You can measure. I don't. I just throw a little bit in, but it is about 1/4 cup. And it's like I said, bread does not have to be overly complicated. There are a lot of things about cooking that, yes, are very scientific and you have to have exact amounts. Bread is not one of them. Bread, biscuits, tortillas, all of those things start with the very same basic blend of flour, shortening or oil, water, maybe a little bit of yeast. And it just depends on how much of each of those things you use that helps create the bread that you're wanting to make. So this is a fairly easy bread, and it's not super complicated. So I just mixed that water, the sugar, the salt, the oil into my oatmeal. And I have a little bit of wheat flour here, and I'm gonna start off with that. I'm gonna dry my cup so that I don't get water in my flour. And we're gonna start off with about 3 cups of flour. And I am using a whole wheat flour here that that Jen Lewis ground for me because I have wheat and no grinder, which seems like an oversight on my part. So it's my birthday at the end of the month, and I think I know what I'm asking for. So we're just gonna mix this flour in, and you're gonna have a fairly stiff consistency, but then we're gonna add our water with our yeast in it. And if you see, it's getting all foamy on the top here. So we're going to add this to the mix right here and stir it in, which loosens up the mix again. So I'm gonna show you. You have like a little shaggy mass of, it looks like oatmeal. It looks like really thick oatmeal. So we have that. And then I'm gonna take some white flour, and again, about 3 cups. So like I said, this makes about 3 loaves. If you were to only wanna make 1 loaf, it's gonna be about 2 cups of flour to 1/3 to 1/2 of a cup of water, and just pinches of everything else. It's about, measurement wise, 6 cups of flour to 1 cup of water, plus then the water that you use to do your yeast in. So, all right, so we're just gonna mix this in. And we're just gonna do it by hand. And it takes a second, but it's fun. And you don't need a fancy mixer. You can do it all by hand. Get your workout. So with that much flour, we get a little, it's still sticky, but it's not watery. So, and I'm just gonna keep mixing it, and I'll come back and show you what it looks like in about 2 minutes of mixing. Okay, so I just took 1 minute and I stirred with my wooden spoon, and I have a dough that looks like this. So it's still sticky. It's not super stiff, but it comes together in one big blob. Now, I like to switch bowls right now. And I took this bowl and I just wiped it with a little bit of oil, and I'm gonna put it in here, and I'm just gonna turn it so it gets the outsides of it, just a little bit of oil. And then I'm going to just, I didn't need this at all. I just stirred it with my spoon, and I'm going to put some saran wrap over it, and I'm gonna let it raise for 20 to 30 minutes, and we'll come back then. Okay, we covered it with the saran wrap. We let it sit for about 10 minutes, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. You take the saran wrap off. It's raising, and it's got a lot of nice air in it. But see, it's still a very sticky dough. And we're going to let it keep going. We're going to pull it in and just mix it with our hands for about 1 minute. The nice thing about this bread is it doesn't require a lot of kneading because you're going for a rough texture. And what kneading does is really develop the gluten fibers. It's going to give you super elasticy, super smooth bread. So like a dinner roll would be well kneaded. But this, we're just going for a lovely, rough, rustic dough. So I'm just going to pull it in from all the sides and get my hands dirty. My son was making fun of me because earlier I told you that I mixed it with a spoon. which I started to, but I really honestly think hands are your best instrument when it comes to the kitchen. So I abandoned the spoon and I just got in there with my hands and I mixed it up. And you do end up a little messy, but also it's a nice, conditioner for your hands. There's some oil in this and it's going to make your hands a little bit nicer. So there we go. So we've pulled it in. We're going to cover it with the saran wrap again and let it raise for another 10 minutes. So instead of a traditional bread dough, which would be like 2 45-minute raises with lots and lots of kneading, what we're going to do is we are going to mix for 1 minute, rest for 10, mix for 1 minute, rest for 10. We're going to do that for 3 times. Okay, so we have let it rise and we have mixed it down 3 times. And one thing you'll notice as you do that is that every time you mix it down in again, it gets a little bit smoother, a little bit more elastic, a little bit less of it sticks to your hands. And now this last time, I am taking just a little bit of flour because I want to just knock down a little bit of that sticky because I'm going to take it out. So we're mixing it in the same way we were before. And then sprinkling just a little bit of flour on top of it. And I'm going to take this same flour, I'm going to sprinkle some on my counter. This is one of the reasons why I love wood counters, but it works on any counter, but you just get a really super smooth surface with a wood counter. And we're going to take it out. And then we've got our nice bowl-shaped bread right now. So I'm going to sprinkle the top of it again with a little bit of flour. And this is the part where we're going to knead it, but we're not going to knead it for very long. Like I said, this is a really easy bread. It's not like those complicated ones that you have to do in a mixer and take a lot of kneading and a lot of time. I mean, this does take time, but what I find is it's mostly waiting time. So right now I'm trying to get all of my classes online, talk to my students. And so I've just been coming over and kneading it for just a second and then going back and working on the computer while also being careful to wash my hands because I am a little bit weird about keeping my computer totally clean. So messy things and computers don't always mix. So I'm just basically kneading it just a little bit just until it's smooth on the outside. I don't feel very much, I used about a half a cup of additional flour. I don't feel very much stickiness. It's pulling together really nicely. Gonna have to scrape the bread dough out of my rings because I forgot to take them off. So I've got this nice piece of bread dough. This is probably enough for 2 larger loaves or 3 smaller loaves, depending on how big you want them. You can cut the recipe down and just make 1 loaf, but why? I always figure we'll eat 1. I always need some to send to someone else, neighbors, friends, people who look like they just need a few more carbs. So there we go. We've got our bread. It's all together and we're going to cut it and we're going to shape it and then we're going to let it rise 1 more time. I got a knife and I'm going to make 2 larger loaves. Maybe. Yeah, I'm going to do 2 larger loaves. So I cut it into 2 pieces and I pull it together. And again, this doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be pretty. I mean, it will turn out pretty when you're done, but half of the fun of this is just the process. So take your time and enjoy it. One thing I'm finding is that I haven't been very mindful lately. And have spent a lot of time just rushing around and making bread. It's an opportunity to just slow down and be really aware of what you're doing and not be rushing out the door, which I guess we're not doing right now. So Okay, that one's nice and smooth, and you'll see they keep their shape really well. So if you find that it's falling and going really flat, it might need a little bit more flour. That's one of the ways you can tell, is the level of stickiness and then whether it will keep its shape nicely. So, okay, so we've got 2 roundish pieces of dough, and I greased a cookie sheet, and I'm just gonna take a little bit of cornmeal and sprinkle on the cookie sheet to go underneath it. You don't need to do this. This is an additional step. I like how it makes the bread feel. It also keeps it from sticking, but if you grease your cookie sheet, it's not gonna stick, so you're fine either way. So then I'm just gonna take my bread dough, I'm gonna put it on these sheets. I'm gonna reuse my saran wrap so that we are being not wasteful. I shouldn't have crumpled it in a ball if I was gonna reuse it. We're just gonna cover it, and we're gonna let it rise for about 30 minutes again. So this is a lot of waiting, reading a good book while you're waiting for it to be done. Just a little bit of work in between. So we're just gonna cover them, we're gonna let them rise. Okay, so it's been rising for about 10 minutes, but the yeast is working really well on it, and that's one of the reasons why you've got to keep an eye on it. So it's actually rising pretty quickly, and you can see it's getting a little larger. One thing that I am going to do with this, and you don't have to, this is totally optional again, but I'm going to make it pretty. So I'm going to take an egg, and if you notice, we didn't put any eggs in this bread. This is an eggless bread. If you're vegan, you wouldn't do this. So don't put eggs if you're not doing the animal products. So that's one nice thing, is this can be a totally vegan bread. But I'm gonna, for this, take an egg and just beat it a little bit in my bowl, and I am going to brush the tops with it. And if you find that the egg is too thick, you can actually add just like a teaspoon of water to it to thin it down. You just want a little bit of that white and that yolk to create a nice glossy coating on your bread. So I'm going to brush both of these. This one over here was in the sun, so it's growing a little bit more than the other one. And that's one thing too that you have to be aware of with bread, is if your house is warm, if it is cool, it's going to affect how quickly your bread rises. It will still rise if you're in a cool house, but just be aware of that so that you're not 10 minutes into the rising and going, wait, my bread is dead. It's sitting here. It's a beautiful day outside, so we had the windows and the door open, and the sun was shining, and it was hitting the bread, so it's rising quite vigorously. So I'm just gonna take a little bit, because I used oatmeal as my little mix in with it, so I'm gonna take a little bit of oats. And basically the egg is going to act a little bit as a glue to stick this to the bread. Now, if you're like, no, that doesn't look good or sound good to me, don't do it. Again, bread, super easy, super customizable. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. My mom used to put sunflower seeds on hers. She loved sunflower. I love sunflower seeds too, but we're going to use oats today. So, and then I'm going to take a serrated knife and just cut a really shallow X into the top of each loaf. And then I have preheated my oven. It's still preheating, and it's at 375. So I think I'm going to give these another 5 minutes to raise, and then I'm just going to stick them in the oven, and then we'll come back and see what they look like when they're done. Okay, so I stuck the bread in the oven. It's been in there for about 35 minutes. I checked on it a few minutes ago, and we're going to take a look at it and see how it's going. Let's see here. I know if we look, we can see it's nice and golden brown. It's getting a little crispy on the edges if we tap it. we can hear that sort of hollow sound. So we're gonna pull it out of the oven. I'm gonna do it with one hand, something I tell my kids never, ever, 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 ever to do. So there we go. This is our lovely bread. It is not like fancy sandwich bread like you would buy in the store. But I think it is much better. And it's easy. And most of the time you have the ingredients on hand, and the ingredients can be changed. And you can just sort of do what you can with what you have. For this, I used half white flour and half wheat flour because I'm trying to save my white flour. I only have like 30 pounds. I had one bag. So I'm trying to make that go as long as it can. We got some wheat ground, so I had some wheat flour. I used the oatmeal in it, which is another kind of flour. That's one of the things I like about doing these mix-ins, is it extends and adds to your bread. You can really get more for what you're making with using less flour. So this is great. Now, I'm gonna say I am still keto. But if there is anything I'm gonna go non-keto for, it's gonna be homemade bread. But tomorrow I'm gonna make myself some keto bread. So the kids are gonna eat this, and I'm gonna eat some keto bread. One thing I also thought was really interesting is, this is my cookbook. It's not this exact recipe. You can see this was a recipe that my mom did. But I just love old cookbooks. I almost feel like they're a little bit of a family history. So this one, it has been through the mill. You can see where I have used it and abused it, and I think that note was something that my grandmother put in, and all of the end papers have written recipes in them that, as we have had family recipes that have come down that we've done, we've written in. And it's just sort of a fun little, almost a record of the types of things that we do. This is my grandma's dill pickle recipe, and we make those every year. So anyway, do you have any interesting cookbooks? I'd love to see them.